letters, and we talked about it on the phone. But how you really feel about it, I don't really know.
What's your take on Cassavetes? 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 Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes?
Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave.
What do we got on the menu today, Dave?
It's the penultimate episode of the Acteurist Oeuvre-View Season 1. Jennifer Jones?
That's right.
We're going to be talking about a pair of 1957 films, both of which are remakes of 30s films.
And I have not seen either of the 30s films. Have you seen both of them?
I've definitely seen the Borzage Farewell to Arms. It's incredible. I saw it more recently than the Norma Shearer, Frederick March, Charles Laughton, Barrettts of Wimpole Street. That one I saw in the 80s once and not since. So.
I have to say, Borzage doing A Farewell to Arms makes me very curious, and after seeing this Barrettts of Wimpole Street, I would be very interested in seeing the version in which Charles Laughton plays the John Gielgud role.
They can't censor the gleam in my eye.
That's what he said, and we'll unpack that when we get there.
Yeah. But we're going to start with A Farewell to Arms.
So, you read the novel, but have not read it for a very long time, right? And don't really remember anything about it?
I read all the Hemingway novels in my 20s, yeah, so...
I avoided all of the Hemingway novels in my 20s. But in preparation for this episode, I did audiobook listen to A Farewell to Arms. So it's recently in my memory, but at the same time, with an audiobook, it's not the most attentive form of encountering a novel.
I'm incapable of keeping any of that in my head.
Well, I've gotten a lot better. I've had quite a bit of practice in the last few years, and I've gotten a lot better, but I'm still not going to swear that I wouldn't have retained more if I had had a recent reading of it. So I have a Audible membership. I've had it for many years. We'll have it for many years to come, as long as I don't lose my job in the current crisis. And the version that I read was narrated by John Slattery.
Of Mad Men fame.
Oh, who did he play?
Roger.
Oh, it was a very good reading. It's always weird because the men have to read the female voices, and the women, if they're narrating, have to read the male voices, and it's always awkward. But his reading was good, and it really emphasized the stylized dialogue rather than really trying to give rounded life to the characters. So it was an interesting contrast with watching the film, where the dialogue is being delivered much more naturalistically than he did, whereas he was emphasizing the mannerism of it.
Sure, well, Hemingway is a modernist literary figure. That is one of the great glories of his writing, the stylized, clipped.
Of the prose and the dialogue.
Yeah.
So the film version, I can say this, I retained enough to be able to say this, the Selznick film version, which was based on a play, and then was also, Ben Hecht wrote the screenplay based on the play.
Solo credit for Ben Hecht as the screenwriter, yeah.
Is tremendously loosely based on the novel in everything except the dialogue between the two main characters.
Right, okay. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So this is, as you mentioned, produced by Selznick. It's his last production, I think.
It was a fiasco.
Yeah. Was it his last production?
Yeah. He just hung up his hat after this. Hung up his spurs.
He hired John Huston to direct it, but that didn't go anywhere.
Oh, that would have been infinitely better. Like, Charles Vidor has made some great movies, but he's a kind of one of those characterless directors who's as good as his script and his producer. So having an actual strong director with this material, I think, would have really improved it.
So you didn't like it very much?
I liked it okay.
Okay.
How did you feel on this viewing?
I love it. I love it.
All right.
I don't love it. I do think that the Borzage film is better, but this is a tremendous film, I think.
Well, defend yourself. Beautiful looking. Hey, who did the cinematography? Did you notice?
No, I'm not sure, actually.
Very beautiful looking. Oswald Morris, not a name I'm familiar with.
Seems to be a 50s widescreen specialist.
Yeah, I guess. Shot Lolita, that's interesting. In 1962. Shot Houston's Moby Dick. Maybe Houston brought him on, who knows?
Well, yeah, he also shot Heaven Knows Mr. Allison, which is John Huston.
Alright, well, tremendous job.
Yeah, it's a beautiful looking film, and the performances, I think, are terrific.
Not faulting in any way the lead actors. In fact, I had a renewed love for Rock Hudson, although toward the end it does give him some speeches that no human being could handle. But whenever he's not called upon to make big speeches, but just to act naturally with his face and body and react and have normal lines of dialogue, he's great. Wonderful, wonderful presence.
Yeah, he is, and Vittorio De Sica is just fantastic and heartbreaking, I find.
He is. I have seen this movie before, actually, several years ago, like probably a decade ago. His performance and his character, the pathos of that performance, I really remembered.
In the Borghese, it's Adolphe Menjou playing that role, and he is very good as well.
Not the same kind of presence. He doesn't have a lot of pathos to him, does he, Adolphe Menjou?
I think he does generate some, from what I recall in A Farewell to Arms, but that's not what you associate him with, for sure. He is more the Walter Burns figure. I guess he could do a lot of things, but anyway, I think De Sica really adds tremendously to this film as the third chair.
I guess I'm almost becoming exhausted by talking about Jennifer Jones's great performances. It's sad to say at the end of all this, I'm almost kind of taking them for granted.
I have no fault with it whatsoever. I think she is perfect as this character who is a real weirdo.
Yeah, she definitely is in the novel too. So let's talk a bit about that. So Hemingway was very upset with this version, probably for many reasons, but the reason primarily quoted in Wikipedia is that Jennifer Jones was way too old to be playing this part.
Well, that's stupid.
Rock Hudson is also way too old to be playing the main character. They're both supposed to be very, very young, which would give it a completely different character as a film, as a war film. It would be more like a Waterloo Bridge type feeling, which would be great.
I think I like it better this way if they're supposed to be in their 30s. Now, I think he did have a real complaint possibly about Sun Also Rises, which was done just a little later, although I really like that movie too, but everyone in that movie's in their 40s.
Well, that's just the age that the big stars were. These movies were made. It was almost an Irishman scenario because Selznick wanted to make this movie for years, and I'm sure he must have had Jennifer Jones in mind for years for this role, but he just couldn't get the right.
She is great in this movie. She doesn't look old to me.
And actually the age difference is correct. I can't remember if you actually find out their ages in the novel, if it's ever stated, although she does call him a boy all the time. But apparently Hemingway based this character, Catherine Barclay, on a woman named Agnes von Kurowski, who was not British, she was American, and she was actually his nurse, which is not the case in the novel. I mean, if this was the basis for the character, he changed a hell of a lot, including the fact that she jilted him and lived to the ripe old age of 92.
Nice.
But he met this woman when he was 19 years old. Serving as an ambulance driver, and she was his nurse, and he fell in love with her, and she was 7 years older. That does come across in the characters in the novel, that there's a slight age difference and experience difference on her side, because when we meet her, of course, she has a tragic love affair in her past.
Yeah, she's been engaged for 8 years, so she can't be that young.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
That's a thing about the novel.
Hemingway was way past his ability to discern anything by the late 50s, so I don't think we need to take too much of his opinion into account.
I didn't know, or I'd forgotten, or I'd never paid attention to the fact that he was such a prodigy, coming out with these two major novels by the age of 30, Sun Also Rises and Farewell to Arms.
His best work may be the short stories he was doing before that, all through the 20s.
So Catherine Barclay in the novel is a real weirdo. She never, for me, really holds together as a psychologically comprehensible, rounded character. She sounds, because I can't even say reads because she's all dialogue. She sounds like a male fantasy / male nightmare. She keeps threatening to turn into this. She's like this character who constantly needs reassurance. But then every time she demands reassurance, then she reassures him that no, she's going to be a good girl and she's going to behave herself and she's not going to demand anything of him. She just oscillates with like rhythmic stylization between these two things the entire time that she's speaking. And actually it is perfect for Jennifer Jones because very few people could play that, have that mercurial quality that can actually make that seem like something a person might really do. Without it being just like a stylistic trick.
Yeah, when you're talking about people who are entering into a love affair in the midst of a horrific war, nobody knows what's going to happen the next day anyway. Why try to be consistent yourself in those circumstances? Even if you wanted to try, most people aren't. I don't think it seems weird that she's all over the place.
A couple of things that were very different I noticed. In the novel, he initially, when he encounters her, she's what I said times 100 because she's still grieving the loss of this man that she loved.
Yeah.
She's acting a little bit crazy. And he says that, the narrator says that he just wants a fling, basically, right? And he doesn't want to get involved with some crazy woman. And initially he's just kind of putting her on and saying what he thinks she wants to hear in order to get laid. And only after they've had a few encounters does he start feeling for her emotionally. And with the Rock Hudson character, he's basically in love with her right off the bat. And I kind of missed that. I kind of missed the opportunity to have a layer there, where he's at least putting on a front that he doesn't want this. But as I got into the movie, it actually works really well for Rock Hudson, who already got famous as a leading man in the Cirque movies with an older woman, Jane Wyman, slightly older, playing older than she actually is. So what it becomes, which I think is there in the Hemingway novel too, but more obscured, what it becomes is the idea of a man falling in love with a woman precisely because she is so wounded and destroyed, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's what her tragedy is, what draws him to her, possibly because, in a kind of love letters way, it's an expression of his own feelings about the war that he can't give expression to because of his gender.
Yeah, I think that that's accurate. He has been gradually taking on more and more of the weight of the conflict throughout the years that have gone by. And by the time we meet him, yeah, the war is already halfway over and he is pretty damaged already, and he's about to get even more damaged as we first meet him.
So prepare yourself. If you don't know anything about A Farewell to Arms, any version, big spoiler coming, so turn off if you need to watch the movie or read the novel first.
Sure.
The other thing is, 10 minutes into the audiobook, I knew, or 5 minutes into meeting Catherine, I knew that this character was going to die. The way she was written was so idealized, although in a very weird, peculiar way, but so idealized that it was quite obviously written. Now, I find it interesting that this wasn't actually based on a woman who died, that Hemingway just had that melodrama trope absolutely down. Didn't even have to experience it. Because the same thing happened in Love is a Many Splendid Thing. I knew that character was going to die right away as soon as we were introduced to him, practically.
Sure.
But that actually was based on a person from the novelist's life who had died that she'd had a love affair with, and in this case, apparently not.
Right, but that's good storytelling.
Sure is.
When you give people that vague premonition and...
But I felt that was missing from the movie.
Really?
That kind of nostalgic or retrospective feeling.
Interesting.
And it would have added a nice... because Jennifer Jones is so built for that ghostly quality that I was regretful that I didn't sense more of that in the filmmaking. Those are all my thoughts, so let's hear some of your thoughts.
It's true. I do think that they try to get away with having DeSica narrate all of the past adventures, amorous adventures of the Hudson character. And I guess that it's not as effective as showing him going to brothels for 20 minutes or so before he gets to that. I don't agree with that.
Point. I thought it was actually, I thought that was amazing, the way that was telescoped when you just see him waving tiredly to the whores looking, the movie's terms, the whores looking out of the window.
Yeah.
And you can just read everything from that.
I don't have a problem with it, but it seemed like you were looking for more of that extra layer showing him what he's like when he's not in love.
Oh, I see. No, I wanted that extra layer with Jennifer Jones.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's true, but that's not how things work in Hollywood movies
in general.
Not. You meet a movie star star, you're generally in love with them right away.
But that's interesting too. Sorry, now I'm talking again. Because the ending of the movie isn't what you're expecting from a Hollywood movie at all.
No.
And the Borzage film, apparently it was made with 2 different endings, and one of which she dies and one of which she doesn't, and because of the censors.
Yeah.
I guess the censors actually would have been, even in the pre-code era, would have been demanding that she dies. But,
because they're not married, yeah.
Yeah, but the actual ending, I think, is a happy ending.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, I just looked it up, yeah. And
Helen Hayes and Gary Cooper.
it's a hard story for Hollywood to tell, I guess is what I'm saying, even as a pre-code and even in the 50s, but Selznick went for it.
He went for it, and, there's some salty language in here. There's some very frank discussion of sex.
And anuses.
Yeah, sure.
All that nursing stuff.
Well, they say hell a lot.
Okay, well, Selznick fought to get the word damn into the end of Gone with the Wind.
These seem like minor things in the 21st century, but they were not in the 50s. He obviously had to do a lot of wheeling and dealing to get that stuff in. And she actually says that she feels like a whore.
Oh, she does say whore, that's true, she does.
That is seriously frank talk for 1957.
Yeah, this is pre-Psycho. That's usually taken to be the movie that brought Hollywood into the modern era, but...
Maybe Farewell to Arms did. It's just that everyone hated it, so it's just been completely forgotten. They only use it as the coda to Selznick's career, tell this wonderful story of Gone with the Wind, and then this decline, and then the final ignominy of Farewell to Arms.
Bosley Crowther says, Miss Jones plays the famous Catherine Barclay with bewildering, nervous moves and grimaces, as if that's not how she's been playing every character since she began as an actress. I'm wondering if he was just tired of her, or she's getting too old for him or something here.
I don't know. I think it works perfectly, and they talk about it in the script that she was crazy in a simple way. I really love that. Is that from the novel?
Oh, the dialogue is lifted directly from the novel, and the dialogue is really wonderful.
Yeah, it is.
It's not naturalistic at all, but it's really wonderful.
Yeah.
And playful.
What can you say?
Having, philosophical dialogues together all the time.
Yeah, they seem like a great couple. They're having a lot of interesting, challenging fun, and they're having sex a lot out of wedlock, and there's just this hell all around them. And this movie, again, this is Hemingway's view of war as well. Very unflinching look at the futility, the uselessness of World War I. Nobody can watch this film and come away from it thinking that anyone deserved to win the war or had anything that they were actually fighting for. And that, I think, is fantastic as well. In the midst of the Cold War, it's not something that you're going to see in every war film. Usually they're going to try to... Did you notice the scroller that appears, the text that appears?
The Selznicky text?
Yeah, saying that the valiant Italians fighting in the picturesque Alps. None of that's actually in the film.
No, as usual with Selznick, he last pulled that trick in Duel in the Sun.
Yeah, exactly. This is just for the censors, and hopefully they'll just tune out after that and not notice that the Italian state is basically just already a fascist state by the end of World War I, executing people left and right just for talking a little bit out of turn, out of depression, because they've been watching everyone, mothers and their children, die on these marches from Caporetto. Those scenes are harrowing.
Well, sorry, I have to go on with the critics here for a minute. So TV Guide, that paragon of critical acuity, said Vittoria De Sica's performance was inspired, but it's not enough to offset the flagrant overacting. Jones gets accused of this a lot during this period, which is bizarre because she's never been more restrained as an actress. The flagrant overacting by Jones and the woodenness. And, of Hudson. Yeah, Hudson never got a fair shake.
He's always described as wooden.
He's subtle.
Yeah.
He's not wooden at all. He's very, very emotional.
He really is.
He
does a lot of crying in this film.
And even when he's not crying, he's, always reacting. Actually, I think he's her best co-star, just in terms of doing acting with Jennifer Jones, since Joseph Cotten.
Yeah, I agree. I've always had a very strong feeling for this film. I would agree that it's not a 5-star masterpiece, but I don't think it's far off from that, frankly.
However, all of that war stuff is not Hemingway's.
No, but it is Hemingway's view of war.
I guess so, but there's no, like, people actually try. They're then, like, killed awfully for it, but they actually try to act nobly in this film, and during the war scene, some people do, and that doesn't happen in the Hemingway. Like, the guy who wrestles the whole scene during this, like, Dickensian march of the retreating Italians and the villagers, right?
Yeah.
The retreating army and villagers. And there's a woman carrying a baby, and she's going to collapse, and so one of the ambulance drivers gives up his seat, and then some other guy takes it, so he ends up killing that guy, and then the woman takes a seat, but she's so weak that she actually drops the baby.
That's horrifying.
Yeah, there's scenes of pure horror. This is what takes the place of the famous Hemingway scene, which is when during the retreat, the ambulance gets stuck, and they're trying to push it out of the mud, and one of the guys decides he's going to desert instead of help. So the main character, I gotta get his name.
Frederick Henry.
So the main character shoots him to wound him, and then another ambulance driver, well, he's a lieutenant. So then one of the drivers steps up and just shoots him to death. And that's Hemingway's vision of war. So what's going on in this movie is not Hemingway's vision of war.
Well, we get that.
Of the utter meaninglessness, like a hollow, numb, dissociated pointlessness. That's Hemingway, not these big emotional scenes of horror.
No, but we get this insane martial court where they are killing everybody.
Well, no, that happens too.
Yeah, I know, but it delivers the point well enough. They're just executing everyone that gets out of step even a tiny bit.
And I imagine the play has removed many, 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 many characters, condensed everything into happening to just this small group of characters. So Rinaldi, the De Sica character, isn't the one who's executed by the court-martial in the novel. It's some other random guy who's part of the retreat.
Right.
And I don't believe I could have missed that big flashy scene with the priest dying with, like, Hemingway's pretty anti-clerical in A Farewell to Arms, or at least there are a lot of scenes questioning, the Italians are questioning the priest, and nobody comes around to him quite as dramatically as happens in this film.
Coming around to a kind of admiration of someone's faith. It doesn't mean, like, I don't feel like De Sica actually then becomes a believing Catholic or anything, but he does.
Doesn't he, though?
I don't think so. He just appreciates that this priest really meant what he said the whole time.
I guess. I don't believe anything like that happens in the novel.
No, I don't think so either. I'm sure you're right about that. Selznick did have his pieties about just organized religion in general. He doesn't seem to have had any personal major religious zealotry. Or he thought he needed to
put those things into a movie. I don't know.
I don't know. It seems pretty heartfelt. And there is no disconnect at all between not having any real religious zeal yourself and feeling admiration for people who are consistent.
No, I'm just saying it's very,
of a
very
faith.
Tonally different than the novel.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's clearly, this is Selznick's A Farewell to Arms.
It is. And it has more in common with Gone with the Wind, because one of the kind of annoying things about it is, despite the fact that Selznick was, of course, very liberal for his time on race issues, the apolitical view it has of the Civil War and the fact that it presents a war is hell, meaningless hell vision of can't we just end this meaningless hell, even though it, it's a war that had some meaningful points to it, unlike World War I. So this is actually a much better canvas for the view that war is meaningless hell.
I like this movie so much more than Gone with the Wind. Yes. Wonderful romantic interludes that are in this film. I guess Bosley Crowther wouldn't have agreed, but I really liked spending quiet time with these two characters.
Well, everybody seems to think, I don't know, she was just getting a ton of flack. Even in the successful film, Love is a Many Splendored Thing, everybody's favorite way of criticizing romantic movies is to say, there's just no chemistry, no believable passion between these two actors, and the film is just sinking beneath the weight of that. And I mean, that's kind of a matter of, that's purely subjective, I think.
Yeah, for me, there is meaningful chemistry between them.
Well, they're two such sensitive actors. I don't know how there couldn't be.
Great to see them act together. We do get a lot of nice little vignette performances as well. We've got Oscar Homolka as the Swiss doctor. We've got some interesting little critiques. Is this in the novel? This idea of Switzerland being pretty standoffish to people, even if they're not maybe going to deport you until they find out you got lots of money.
That is 100% in the novel. I don't believe the part where his aunt has a hotel is in the novel. Well, the narrator flat out says, oh, as soon as they knew we had money, they came around.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that is Switzerland in a nutshell, isn't it? As we know from the way history has developed, they had no problem with Nazi treasure either. Although this predates that. But still, they were not exactly unmercenary.
The trip, the escape in the boat.
Yeah.
Again, I guess in play-like condensing, a bunch of characters have been eliminated from this portion of the film so that the running away in the boat at night becomes just the idea of the two characters rather than a plan formulated by several characters.
No, I think it works better this way, for a film anyway.
It's interesting, she gets a different heroic moment in the film than she does in the novel. There aren't really heroic moments in the novel, so that would explain it. In the novel, all that happens is that at one point, even though she is pregnant and it's the middle of the night and it's been raining, she suggests that she could do some rowing and he doesn't want her to, and finally she insists and she rows and he can eat a sandwich. But in this one, it's a speech.
Yeah, well, this is incredible because the movie really does make you feel along with her this terror of rain that she has. And it goes back to it several times. And of all things to happen while they're trying to make this desperate journey across the lake, it begins to pour on them. And she completely rises to the occasion there. I think that's great.
Her fear of rain is in the novel. I don't think it's hammered quite as much, but it is definitely present in the beginning.
No, because the movie knows it's going to use it in that crucial scene. So they have to make it really palpable.
That might be in the novel too, I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. And then, of course, she does die in the rain, although Hudson tries not to tell her about it, but she knows anyway.
And another very Hollywood difference is that her final line in the novel too is the very quintessentially
Hemingway-esque.
I know, but I don't think you can say that when you're saying quintessentially. Sentiment, it's just a dirty trick. So that is her final line, but she doesn't die right after that.
Right.
He leaves the room and we hear about her horrible death, sort of like in Madame Bovary.
Put us on the table with her for a long time, too, in the film, and it's harsh to watch this go on.
This is the thing, like, Jennifer Jones has been acting very quietly and in a very restrained fashion for the entire film. This is the only scene, this horrifying death laver is the only scene where the character loses control, in fact, and isn't a good girl, and isn't the way she thinks her man wants her to be.
No, and she's even better. What did you think of the horrifying comedy set piece of the ambulance ride for Hudson as he is delivered to this new hospital?
I'm assuming Ben Hecht added all of that stuff?
I think it's actually pretty effective.
What's the point of it, though? Just to set us up for the fact that Catherine Barclay is going to be butchered by European doctors? Like, I don't know.
I think just to show how really, in the midst of something like this, got like a less than 50-50 chance of being in the hands of anyone that is gonna even try to do you any good. Does not fill one with hope in a crisis that people are gonna be cool under fire here. I mean, they can't even drive slowly, these guys. Now, I guess you could say that there's some kind of xenophobia going on.
There's also a competent doctor present.
I know.
Ultimately.
Yeah, exactly. I don't feel like that, but I could imagine someone watching it and thinking,
well, some of the minor comedy Italian characters did seem like Manuel from Fawlty Towers.
Well, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
Selznick is trying to obviously vary the tone a lot more than... I mean, the novel is a slim little novel. It just kind of goes off like a shot. It's not an epic.
No, well, Hemingway writes slim little novels.
It's not an epic, so there has to be... I mean, I guess I can understand critics who complained about padding, because there definitely did have to be some padding to get it to Selznickian length. It's too bad, though, because Selznick could produce a film. Why did he need to do this over and over, these massive, bloated things? He could produce a film like A Star is Born, the William Wellman Star is Born, which is just a neat, compact little thing.
Yeah, Portrait
right?
of Jenny.
That would have been perfect. That would have been much better. He didn't need all of it.
What's the padding, though?
Well, what I just said, there's this whole comedy sequence. There's also the action sequence with the ambulance initially when he gets wounded, with the ambulances that get blown up.
I don't know if I find that to be padding. It all seems pretty relevant. I do think that part of what the movie is talking about presents a lacerating view of wartime incompetence. And I think you want to see that soldiers are just being tossed around willy-nilly as they get driven around. Sometimes they're dead before they get to the hospital because they're hemorrhaging, because they are going over potholes and nothing can be done.
That was pretty horrifying when the blood starts pouring onto Rock Hudson's face.
Yeah, and when it really happens to Hudson in that scene, it goes on forever. They put him in an elevator, they can't get his foot in.
Yeah, it's basically all of the things that Jerry Lewis does to people in The Disorderly Orderly 10 years later.
Except that it's also really, really, it is kind of funny, but it's also horrifying.
Not a full 10 years. It's also horrifying in The Disorderly Orderly.
Maybe, but I don't...
No, it really is.
You don't go to a Jerry Lewis film feeling even prepared to have pathos in a scene like that. With Rock Hudson, you do feel like, oh my god, this guy, we've seen him, he's a gentle ambulance driver, he's in this romance, and they're gonna kill him before he sees Jennifer Jones again because they can't fit him in an elevator. It's insane.
Yeah, that was really terrible.
And what about Mercedes McCambridge?
Yeah, oh, right, that's who that was. Oh, Touch of Evil.
Wow,
Jesus.
yeah. Johnny Guitar.
Yeah, right.
She is one of the great 50s nasties, and here she's just playing a by-the-book nurse, and she gets a lot of fascist power out of it.
Well, the nurse definitely exists in the novel.
And I really like the nurse that becomes his accomplice. Ferguson?
Yeah, John Slattery read this nurse, Ferguson. She's supposed to be Scottish.
It's Elaine Stritch.
Not American. She's supposed to be Scottish. And he reads her like he can't do a woman's voice and a Scottish brogue at the same time, so she sounds like an angry Scottish man every time he speaks her lines in the novel. And she's very, very different role in the novel than what we see here. Much less level-headed.
Oh, interesting. She is one of these great accomplice characters that you get in Hollywood films. She understands instinctively what's going on with the protagonist and maneuvers to help.
Yeah, that's not her role in the novel, ultimately at all. Yeah, it's interesting because the novel is so much more slender and compact, and yet at the same time it presents a much greater social panorama. Because it really is just reduced to a few key characters.
Yeah, well, Hemingway is it's a novel for sure, but he also went into the war as a reporter, basically. A reporter working undercover, kind of, in the ambulance corps. And you get that sense. It does feel like reportage, his novel. And this film doesn't have that quality, but you would not go to a Selznick film for that quality, that's for sure.
Well, what do you go to a Selznick film for?
A great love story.
Well, I'm sure that's why he wanted to make it.
Yeah.
It doesn't say here, in the production notes section in Wikipedia, it doesn't say when he got this obsession with making it, but I'm going to go with after Gone with the Wind, that he wanted to make another love story with a war setting.
Sure. It's a tried and true approach to hooking the audience. You've got huge stakes, both emotionally and geopolitically.
Yeah, but this completely failed. Why?
I guess the world had moved on by 1957. They didn't want Selznick movies anymore. I don't know what else to say.
Did they ever want Selznick movies? Movies really made by Selznick, not just produced by Selznick, other than Gone with the Wind? That's the kind of the problem that he had. Let's posit that it's not simply, although it certainly was the case, but it's not simply that Selznick just kept trying to repeat his success with Gone with the Wind by repeating Gone with the Wind. Let's say that the Selznick movie is actually a genre, just like any director's auteur style movies. It's that kind of self-repetition. And David Lynch with Twin Peaks, only once did the public turn out to want what Selznick had to offer.
I don't think you can say that, because Selznick was tremendously successful throughout the 1930s. Before Gone with the Wind, leading up to, and I think most of those movies are far better.
But he didn't try to effectively create the movie as the producer of it rather than allowing the director to do that.
Tale of Two Cities and David Copperfield, those movies are both incredible, and sure, they have good directors working on them, but I feel like more than anything, they bear the Selznick imprimatur.
Well, Tale of Two Cities? Well,
Yeah.
that's why I kept thinking of, I mean, it's true, Gone with the Wind is not his only, okay, let's stay with the Lynch analogy here. If A Farewell to Arms is Selznick calling back to his greatest hits, it's not just Gone with the Wind, it's also all these, which seem very weird in a Hemingway movie, but all these Dickensian war street scenes, and the scene that I just described
Yeah.
during the retreat, which has nothing tonally similar at all in the novel. So yeah, it really is him using this material as a way to throw together all of his own past interests and glories.
Yeah, so in that, there's a major auteurist impulse behind this in the producer. As an object of study, at the very least, it is worth taking a look at. If you care at all about the Selznick oeuvre, you have to take this one seriously. You can't just treat it as some kind of past the prime, tossed-off failure. It clearly was assembled with great care, and I don't think his powers had failed him at all at this point. I really wish he'd been able to continue.
No, it's very sad, because Selznick was a person. Again, though, I haven't read the biographies. I don't know how he felt about all these things. But I'm projecting that Selznick was a person that needed to feel validated by the public. Mainly because he had that validation.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. He's the kind of person that did care about Oscars and that kind of stuff.
And just general reception and popularity. Like touching and speaking to a wide public. So it makes me sad to think that he would have gone out so ignominiously in his own mind.
But he didn't want to do it on anyone else's terms, which is one thing that I do love about him, right? He didn't make a fucking biblical epic like everyone else was doing in the 50s. That wouldn't have been anything like what he would have wanted to do, and I respect him for not doing it. Because he could have gotten kudos for that, I'm sure.
And again, he just wanted to do this. Like, he hadn't really produced a movie in years, not other than distributing it. Had he, at this point?
Yeah.
This was like a pet project. Again, like The Irishman. He had just had it in his back pocket for years.
Another wonderful thing about him and about the Jones-Selznick alliance that, this is our last statement on that. People always talk about it. We've referred to this many times, but we won't have any other opportunities. They always make it seem like he was pushing her into things she couldn't handle, and it ruined the movies. And that is insane every time, and here again, she maybe was too old for the part, but I don't feel any worse for that. I think she was terrific in the movie and exactly what was called for.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of would have liked to see it even better when she was the right age, only because reading the novel did make me think that you could get a Waterloo Bridge kind of, James Whale's Waterloo Bridge kind of young, pure love against a terrifying, hollow, meaningless backdrop of nihilism vibe out of it more, in that case.
Yeah, but what's wrong with pure middle-aged love against
I know,
a backdrop
why am I, so... I kept watching this film and thinking about the fact that we're even older than these characters, so why am I so loath to believe that at this age you could discover such a pure and wonderful passion as these two had?
Yeah, to me, I think it's perfect, as is. Go see it.
Also, it's interesting that Vittorio De Sica turns up here as an actor after the kind of conflict that they were reported to have on Terminal Station.
Yeah, well, he may never have wanted to direct under Selznick again, or...
But he clearly, unlike Powell and Pressburger, didn't hold any grudges.
Yeah, and he maybe liked Jennifer Jones.
Yeah, who knows?
Who wouldn't?
So I like the idea that has emerged here from our discussion. This should be thought of as Selznick's auteur piece, as the cap to his career that's looking back and reflecting on his whole long creative career as a producer in the way that Twin Peaks Return looks back on David Lynch's career, right?
Yeah.
As an auteur. It's interesting the way that he went from the classics, 19th century classics, Dickens and Little Women, to American epic kitsch.
Sure.
With Margaret Mitchell.
Well, yeah.
And then from there to really trying to tackle a modernist classic, which by that time was several decades old, because it's kind of the general direction he was moving in anyway towards modernism, seemingly both with keeping up with his reading, because we know he was paying attention to whoever the hot young new writers were. That's why he was able to recommend Truman Capote to John Huston in the kind of directors that he wanted Jennifer Jones to work with. So Selznick did not, it's not really true that Selznick remained behind the times or was left behind by the times. It's just that, like I said, there was one moment where the style of filmmaking that he ultimately developed caught the imagination of the public, and then it didn't anymore.
I think that's fair to say. You might also say that two things that are pretty consistent in Selznick are mid-20th century style feminism, and...
Yeah, which in some ways I like better than what we've got now.
Well, in some ways. In other ways it is lacking, but that's to be expected. And a very dead-set anti-war attitude, which permeates projects, as you say, where it's misplaced, and other projects where it is very well placed.
Now, would this have any analog in the reality of Selznick's own life and times, do you think? Well, I mean, obviously it connects with World War II, and since he went away.
Yeah, but I'm saying...
But it feels like a very broad sort of Hollywood liberal sentiment in his work.
Yeah, but not by 1957. This is the Cold War. People are not very keen on criticizing or undercutting patriotism anymore in the 50s.
I know, and this is when he goes darkest. It's like a nihilistic ending.
Exactly. And this fucking American ally Italian death court is extraordinary. You could even see it as a kind of commentary on McCarthyism with much direr consequences, like immediate execution rather than losing your job. It is really intense.
That's interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if that is something they snuck into the screenplay, because by making Rinaldi going mad from syphilis, right, and saying these things that he believes, but that he shouldn't be saying because he'll be court-martialed for them, it actually makes it thematically resonant in a different way in the screenplay that this happens to him, to this important character, rather than to somebody we don't care about, and does make it seem more like a witch hunt rather than just another meaningless, stupid horror of the war.
Oh, well, it's definitely a witch hunt. They execute Rinaldi and then they just move right on to executing Rock Hudson because he's not Italian. That's the only reason, right? He's certainly not German. You look at Rock Hudson and listen to him talk, they should be able to recognize an American.
That paranoia is in the novel. Like, there's this rumor going on during the retreat that there are Germans disguised as Italians all over the place.
And that's probably true, but it doesn't matter.
But the way it's played up in the screenplay, it does make me think that there could have been some kind of McCarthy comment.
Yeah, and these guys have just fucking lost it. Italy is a failed state. We're being overrun by Germany, and we're just going to execute everyone at this point. Well, we can, because we're rabid.
I mean, I think there is some kind of, to a degree, a snobbery involved in thinking that Selznick just wasn't capable of, coming up to Hemingway's level.
Absolutely not the case. Selznick didn't want to do exactly what Hemingway did. He took some of the structure for the romance, but he did his own thing with it, which is what you want from an adaptation.
Who were we talking about recently as another very, very sensitive film actor who doesn't get enough credit? John Travolta.
Yes.
That's who it was.
John Travolta and Rock Hudson.
Just pay attention once to a Rock Hudson performance. Just pay attention to the way he reacts to his scene partners.
Yeah, well, if people weren't so busy...
Not to mention he has the best voice in movies ever.
Yeah, Rock Hudson and Ronald Colman.
Sure.
If people weren't so busy just obsessing on the purely ironic aspects of Cirque films, they would also recognize that we're getting some deeply heartfelt performances out of many Circean actors, but Rock Hudson probably more than anyone.
Actually, Joseph Cotton, another great voice. She acted with some great voices, Jennifer Jones. In our next film, we'll talk a little bit more about Jennifer Jones, maybe?
Of course.
We didn't pay enough attention to her in this one, but like I said, I've almost got to the point where she's kind of a prestige actor at this point, although critics were beginning to shit on her after being on her side for a long time, and I'm just kind of taking this for granted. Also, notably, Farewell to Arms, she is not the main character, and that's quite unusual for her films, and it's also unusual or unexpected that Selznick finds a role for her where she is not the main character, right? We never get to know her from any perspective other than Rock Hudson's.
No, she's a person that is involved with the protagonist. She is not the protagonist. That's true.
Barretts of Wimpole Street, it's very interesting. I found her performance very interesting in that it's very accomplished, but she kind of erases herself and lets everyone else have the flashier role. Did you agree? Was that your impression of it?
I think she's got some pretty great little flourishes in there, but sure, she is mostly on a couch and she's the center of attention, but kind of a...
quiet?
Yeah.
And sensible, in a way, at least in contrast with Robert Browning.
Yeah, he is a spaz.
Yes. Who is this actor, anyway? I want to find out who this actor is. I didn't look him up.
Travers? Bill Travers is his name?
He seems like one of those British actors that generation after generation, that just happen in England, generation after generation, and, you know, a lot of them end up playing Doctor Who since the 1960s. Just a kind of generic, competent, flashy British actor.
I don't think that he's at the Frederick March level, but he delivers what is required of him in this film, I think.
He began working on stage in 1949.
So, the story, which is a famous story by the 50s, people are kind of familiar with the legend, even if they're not. It was a play. A
1930 play by Rudolf Bessier, or however the hell you pronounce that. Bessier, he's British. Dutch-English dramatist, so no, I don't know how to pronounce it. That became the signature role of the famous Catherine Cornell.
Okay, yeah. So they made a film of it in 1934 with MGM Queen of the Lot, Norma Shearer.
Sure, I really want to see that now. I love the idea of Frederick March playing the Browning role, and of course Charles Laughton playing the father, which would be unimaginably different than John Gielgud.
Yeah, you'll have to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember it that well, but I sort of have a dim memory.
Well, they have a very different ambiance.
He does play it kind of stern like that.
Sure, Laughton can be scary, sure.
Yeah. Now, well, we'll have to watch it. I can't really comment on it, because it was 30 years ago I saw it.
I definitely want to do it when we get there in our studios year by year.
Yeah, we'll try. We'll see. I don't know if we've got 1934 MGM planned yet. I don't think we do. So yeah, we could choose that one.
The main point of interest of this play is that it essentially accuses Elizabeth Barrett Browning's father of being incestuous.
Oh, yeah.
According to Wikipedia, I have no other source for this. There was no basis on which to surmise that this was the case. Apparently he was, stern and tyrannical and obsessed with his children not marrying or his daughters not marrying, but...
The full portrait as it unfolds by the end, it makes a convincing case that this was a really psychosexually fucked up individual, at least.
Oh, yes. So here's what it says here on Wikipedia. Although Edward Barrett's behavior in disinheriting any of the children who married seems bizarre. Any of the children? The boys, too? There is no evidence of his being sexually aggressive toward any of the family members. That's where Charles Laughton came in, saying to producer Irving Thalberg, "They can't censor the gleam in my eye." Well, the overt suggestions of incest were not removed from the 1957 version.
No, they weren't. More than that, the really disturbing talk of marital rape.
Yes.
Which just floors Jennifer Jones.
Well,
at the
and
end
it
of the
also
film.
makes her fear that she is going to be raped and needs to get out of the house this minute.
Yeah, it is really terrifying. I think Gielgud does a great job of that, too, when it finally comes out exactly what he thinks sex is like and why he doesn't want anyone to get married, because he doesn't want anyone else to go through what he went through as he was driven by the beast within him to rape his wife again and again and again, because he's got all these kids.
Because we were watching this under the worst circumstances in which I have ever viewed a movie in my life, I was so distracted that I missed parts of the key speeches. So
You want to explain that? So people don't just think we were going through what everyone else in the world is going through, which is fucking horrendous, the COVID-19 crisis. There's that. And on top of it, we had to watch it on Daily Motion, and it was being interrupted every 5 minutes by the worst commercials you could imagine.
You would think that we are exaggerating by saying interrupted every 5 minutes. We are not. And it got stuck on an internet loop. This isn't your normal annoying commercial interruptions. First of all, they're automatic, so they just come in on a timer without caring that they're interrupting the most dramatic moments of... And it's also it all happened in the second half of the movie, so all of the scenes were hugely dramatic and being interrupted every 5 minutes. And then it got mentally confused and kept playing the exact same ad 3 times every time. And it had a button that said skip ad, but you couldn't skip it. So this woman, Karen Carr's face and voice, by the end of this, I had terrible violent feelings. Parody. But I don't know how else you're supposed to end up feeling towards these people that are being, actually their faces being shoved in yours and into their screens and like the most terrible angles and lighting. This is what Joe Biden is hiding from. You know, he's like, I can't get on the internet until I look perfect and the lighting is perfect because this is what's going to happen. I'm telling you.
Yeah, well, the point of these ads are to make you give money to Daily Motion so that you
stop.
Don't have to see ads anymore.
But we will just never go near it again.
Well, we did watch the whole film, thankfully, by the end.
What did I start saying before? Oh yes, terrible circumstances. So I missed the details of this speech. So what was he saying to her exactly? So he was saying, you were conceived out of love.
Yeah, but after that, things had gone sour in the marriage, and the wife did not want to sleep with him anymore, and he forced it on her.
But he said it was because I chose the right.
No.
What did that mean exactly?
The right was for him to rape her over and over again, because she was his wife.
Oh, okay.
Right?
But he also thinks he was driven by a beast to do this.
Yeah, well...
How can it be the right if he's being driven by the monster within?
Well, because the Bible says, be fruitful and multiply. You're the husband, she's the wife. There's no getting out of it. So if people don't want to have sex anymore, you must do it anyway.
Yeah, and I guess he was saying that you were conceived out of love and then all the rest were conceived out of fear.
Yeah, and there's like 8 other kids.
But what's great is that he all equally hates. But what's great is that already in the very first scene where they're alone, where he has the discussion about fear and love with her over drinking the port.
Porter, it's beer.
Porter.
Stout.
Yes, the porter, yeah. Which is...
It's supposed to be nourishing, right?
Which she considers disgusting. Actually, in the Hemingway novel, there's this whole sequence. Catherine is talking about drinking beer in Switzerland for the baby, but not in order to... Not for her health, but to make the baby small. The doctor advocated that she should try to drink beer to make the baby small because she's slim-hipped and she might have trouble otherwise.
Ah.
Doctor's advice. Anyway, doctor's advice obviously has been very terrible about alcohol throughout the years. But even in that scene, there is this strong suggestion of sexual threat and terror, even though nothing sexual is mentioned.
Yeah, for sure. No, Gielgud, I mean, he knows the audience probably has at least some dim memory of the Charles Laughton film.
Or the famous play.
Yeah. And he is just going for it right away, and he keeps that tone. This is not new, right? The hypocritically lascivious Christian zealot.
Sure.
There's so many characters like this, but Gielgud is giving us his version of it, and I think he does a good job.
The first time you get a hint, I mean, you've already had lots of hints, but the first time it becomes very clear what's going on is that scene of displacement where the friend of the family, the young woman, sits on his lap and gives him a little temple massage to try to get her way.
And he just goes for it, man. He just grabs her and gives her a movie kiss.
And it's obvious that, well, what's interesting about it is that, of course, what it's implying is that she says she has this exact same kind of relationship with her father, and that's how she always gets her way with him. So the suggestion is that, particularly in this Victorian, ultra-patriarchal family model, the relationship between father and daughter is always incestuous. It's just not usually literally so.
Is it any wonder that Freud came out of this exact period in history?
Well, yeah, exactly. That's what the play is drawing on. Retrospectively adding Freud to the period that he came out of.
Sure. Well, I mean, Freud comes out of the same Victorian matrix, even if it was in Vienna.
Yeah.
It's the same family romance.
Although 1930, yeah, Freud is still going strong in 1930.
Yeah, he's still alive. Hopefully he went to see it and said, you see?
That that is, I guess, the main point of interest in the film. Otherwise, it's just a story of parental tyranny and defying that in the name of sexual and emotional blossoming, in a now Voyager kind of way.
Yeah, but what an interesting family here.
Yes,
These siblings
definitely
are really wonderful with each other. It has not affected them. It hasn't poisoned them towards each other.
Yep.
It's just this fucking father. And when he's not there, everything is great.
And they're just absolutely terrorized by him. And it's interesting.
And the way they all love Elizabeth is just really heartwarming. The movie, despite its subject matter, most of the time, it is kind of a fun movie to watch. Everyone's being nice to each other. It's got this nice core aspect to it.
Made me think of Holiday, the way they all congregate in her room and try to have fun and get away from that father. I also thought it was interesting the way that it decided to focus on two female characters, despite the fact that there's tons of boys also being tyrannized.
Yeah, and we see the way that the pressure is exerted on them. Maybe their sexual activities are not being policed quite so thoroughly, but if they get out of line at all, they're going to be thrown out of the family firm.
Right.
They're just as effectively stymied, or maybe even more so.
And it's interesting, toward the end, I kept asking myself why these girls don't just elope.
Well, they've internalized.
Yeah, well, that's the only possible explanation, that they've internalized this terror and obedience.
And I think that the movie really effectively conveys how this happens and how the knot is eventually loosened. It's not really about standing up to this evil tyrant. It's really more about coming to a final understanding of what he really is.
Yes.
And then she's not afraid of him, well, she's afraid of him, but she no longer cares what he thinks. And that's what matters, because what's been keeping her in that house this whole time is the belief that he is a loving father, and that he's just misguided and she can't hurt him by disobeying him. And when she realizes that he is one of history's great monsters, then she doesn't care anymore. She's gonna run away, and it doesn't matter if he is hurt by this anymore.
And it does convincingly show you, again, we find ourselves talking about rape in a movies that we have not chosen for thematic reasons, practically every other episode.
Yeah, well,
rape is like a huge part of movies.
It's a basic fact.
Under patriarchy, as Bernie so thoughtfully noted in his feminist essay from the 1970s.
Yeah, exactly. This almost no escape from it if you're going to have strict patriarchal control.
And so, as we often find ourselves saying, amazing to see this subject treated so many decades before Fire Walk with Me, right?
Yeah.
So it really really takes you through the steps of coming to realize that a parent doesn't love you.
Yeah.
And what a terribly difficult thing that is to realize, and really only threat of bodily and deep psychological, well, she's already suffered deep psychological harm, but even deeper psychological harm, that's the only thing that can bring her to this realization.
That speech that Gielgud gives right near the end is not dissimilar in any way from Laura realizing that Leland is Bob, right?
Which one?
When he talks about the conception of all the children after her.
Oh yeah.
Everything clicks into place, and there's no possibility of overacting that scene. She does it absolutely perfectly. She is coming face to face with absolute horror.
Well, again, because of the terrible circumstances of the viewing, I had trouble getting into the drama, but despite the fact that those terrible circumstances were getting worse and worse as the viewing went on, it's really from that scene onward that the movie moves into a whole new level.
Yeah, I think it's a powerful film, and yeah, it would be better to rewatch it one day, either if there's a DVD that ever comes out, or if we just give Dailymotion their blood money so that we don't have to see.
We're never doing that. So there's the sneaking past the door, which is even more suspenseful, despite the fact that it doesn't have all the levels of subterfuge irony, even more suspenseful than the staircase scene at the end of Notorious. Then the sister, who we don't really see a lot of, but we hear that she has given up her love life.
Oh yeah, and her freak out is perfect.
Her insane, joyous laughter. That was amazing.
Yes. Someone got out, and presumably others will follow suit. Henrietta...
I hope.
Yeah, we don't actually get to see her get away with her soldier that she loves, but we have to assume that the tyrant's power is broken at that point, and everyone's gonna file out.
So, I have heard this before, but I'd forgotten all about it, that Virginia Woolf wrote a biography of the courtship of the Brownings, based on their letters, from the perspective of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's beloved dog Flush, who plays a very important role in this movie. So, as a great animal lover, Dave, can you tell us about this aspect of the film?
Oh, I really did like this dog.
He's important. He starts and ends the movie, basically.
The movie cedes his importance immediately, and the ways in which the father is already treating the dog as a rival, an emotional rival, and as a kind of a hostage. He is threatening to have the dog put down in the first scene and in the last scene.
I was wondering if it was almost, in a way, kind of like an outward animal projection of herself, like in Gone to Earth. I was wondering if the father viewed it more as a rival or as an extension of her that he can punish.
Yeah, exactly.
That he can, like, murder her spirit, right?
Yeah, he can't because she takes him away, thankfully, and he is frolicking on the beach with her and Robert in the final scene, and that is very heartening to see.
So 2 movies that were very, very depressing to watch, but one had a very, very unhappy ending and one had a very happy ending.
It's true, and hopefully the world will have a happy ending as well. This was quite interesting to watch, given our circumstances. And the first one shows a world crumbling due to conflict.
Italy specifically crumbling.
Yeah, and the second one shows a shut-in, which all of us are right now, finally escaping.
Into the sunshine in Italy, which a new Italy that will be rebuilt someday with living people in it.
Yeah, and we really hope that all of you out there are weathering this treacherous period in world history around the globe.
And that rent freeze is happening where you are. It hasn't happened here yet. But to talk about Jennifer Jones again, I found it interesting to think about how right around, I would say... Actually, let me pull up her filmography, because we're getting near the end here. Jennifer Jones, the actress, not the curler, Google. For me, I was working on this theory of right around the time of Love is a Many Splendid Thing, she starts specializing in characters, and this is interesting to think about, considering her earlier kinds of roles, specializing in very, very, very repressed characters.
Yeah.
There are seeds for that from her first appearance in Song of Bernadette, where she plays a character so repressed that she's dissociated from pain itself.
She doesn't feel the disease gnawing away at her body, that's right.
Or she somehow carries on anyhow. But in other films, frequently she's either extremely uninhibited, or there's a dialectic of inhibited and uninhibited in her performances, which there still is in Love is a Many Splendid Thing. But then, Good Morning, Miss Dove, Barretts of Wimpole. Yeah, I guess you're right. I guess it is kind of similar in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, she's very liberated in terms of her literary aspirations and achievements, and the way her spirit has reached out beyond the room that she's trapped in to ensnare the love of Robert Browning, one of the great poets of the era. Their romance is celebrated as this coming together of literary giants.
Apparently it is true that in his first letter to her, he said that he loved her poems and he loved her too.
Sure.
He was, in fact, this wild man.
Yeah. Very few people are better suited to playing a romantic or post-romantic poet. I mean...
Oh, you know what this made me long for, only in my imagination, and it made me think about writing another play, which I haven't thought about in like a decade at least.
Jennifer Jones as Emily Dickinson?
No, I don't think that would be quite right.
No.
But Jennifer Jones as Alice James.
Oh, interesting.
In the whole matrix of the James family.
If only we could go back in time and make that happen.
Yeah, but I've always wanted to write a James family play. Susan Sontag actually wrote a play called Alice in Bed, which is about exactly that. But I would like to do like a whole James family play. One day I'll read the 2 giant... Well, there's one giant James family biography, and then there's a slightly... No, I think they're both giant, actually. And I need to read them both, and then I'll actually write that play. And someone might produce it, because it's about famous people.
There
which
you
is
go.
What you have to do in order to get a play produced.
There's your Henry James reference for this week.
But yeah, I mean, they're just standing in for basically any intellectual literary couple.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, I'm not at all familiar with either. I mean, I've read some Browning poems and some Barrett poems, but I don't really know them all that well. It's not a period I know very well in terms of poetry.
Well, I've been subjected to a fair amount of Robert Browning in my university courses. Elizabeth Barrett Browning is not held in very high regard. She is considered a basic Victorian sentimentalist. The people that are liked now are
Christina Rossetti,
Emily Dickinson, Hopkins.
I do like Christina Rossetti a lot.
Complex, psychologically and syntactically complex poets like that.
Well, Tennyson...
He's pretty simple-minded.
No, he's not, man. Sometimes he is, sometimes he's not. Like, Maud...
He can be good.
Maud is an incredible poem. But yeah, I haven't explored Browning or Barrett.
Did you have anything to add to that idea? I mean, it's very unusual for an actress who was a great beauty and considered a sex symbol in her 20s and early 30s to switch into this mode of playing these highly repressed characters. I mean, obviously she's always had this neurotic streak, but I wonder why she moves towards tamping that down. I don't know, it certainly sets her up with some very interesting acting challenges.
Yeah, I think that's probably... Well, that's the best face we can put on it. The other face of it is that she's in her late 30s and Hollywood is starting to push her towards that. But I think she made the best of it.
But again, aging sex goddesses are not generally pushed in the direction of playing more and more highly repressed characters.
Well, I don't know about that. Joan Crawford wound up doing that a lot as well. Witness Autumn Leaves.
I guess that's true. She is so odd, though, that I always find it impossible to think that she was actually a sex symbol after the mid-30s.
Well, yeah, I don't really see her that way.
No, she's much more of a leading character actor.
Yeah, I mean, Joan Crawford is very beautiful in the 30s. Afterwards, she just gets more and more stylized. I think Jennifer Jones just looks absolutely beautiful in every movie we've seen her in, anyway. She's 38 at this point, so she's not old at all. I mean, she's much younger than we are.
No, but she's going to retire pretty soon, and we'll talk about some of the personal and professional reasons, possibly, and cultural reasons for that in our final Jennifer Jones episode.
Yeah, it's coming next month. Now, usually we do Fear and Movie Going in Toronto, our segment on our cinema-going life in the great city of Toronto, but there is none.
There is
right
no
now.
more cinema-going life. There may never be one again.
We hope that there will be, but for now, that segment's off. So we're just gonna bid you adieu. And next week, you can tune back in, hopefully, to hear Hollywood Studios Year by Year. We're going into 1932, and we start, as we always do, with Paramount. We're going to be watching 1 Hour with You by Lubitsch and Love Me Tonight, Ruben Mamoulian.
Oh, wow, that's going to be great.
A pair of great operettas, comic operettas for you.
See you then.